Welcome to Last Call Games. Now, last week, a certain video game character turned 35. Very important. So, this week, we're going to do all Pac-Man games all week. Now, I'm going to use the same video as the intro for all of them, so that's why. I'll do little annotations over each one for a link to the next video. Monday we're going to start out with the Namco plug-and-play Pac-Man game. This includes Pac-Man and 4 other games. This came out in, I believe, 2003. It was one of the very first of the TV plug-and-play genre. That's a thing. Tuesday we're going to move on to Pac-Man Adventures in Time for the personal computer. I believe this was a PC exclusive, but I'll let you know more obviously in the review for it itself. Wednesday, we're going to move on to Ms Pac-Man. This is another plug-and-play unit by Jakks Pacific. It's a sequel and included Ms Pac-Man and 4 different games, including Pole Position, which included this interesting twist mechanic. I'll talk about that later in the video itself, obviously. Stay tuned for that one. Thursday, we'll move on to Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness for the Sega Dreamcast, because it wouldn't be a week without a Sega Dreamcast game. Finally, we'll end up on Friday with yet another plug-and-play unit, Super Pac-Man, which includes 4 different Pac-Man games. Pac-Man, Super Pac-Man, Pac and Pal, and I believe Pac-Man Plus. Including also has this little joystick that's shaped like Pac-Man. Not sure how well that shows up. It'll show up better in the video itself, in the review. So, stay tuned, and now we're going to start on to the actual review itself. A couple years after coming out with the plug-and-play unit that I showed on Monday, Namco and Jakks Pacific released Ms. Pac-Man with 5 different games included, and a ferret. Say hi to the people that live. Okay. This included the titular Ms. Pac-Man game, Pole Position, Galaga. That's just the Namco logo. Xevious and Mappy. Now, what sets this unit apart from the last unit that I showed, besides the improved emulation that's used in this unit as opposed to the other one, is the twist mechanic, as well as the extra button, which is only used for 2 games. Basically, for Pole Position, pretty much actually exclusively, since the original arcade game has this massive steering wheel, they replicate that by putting I believe it's probably just a potentiometer at the bottom of this, to twist that, and it centers back towards the middle. It's probably hard to tell because it's just straight yellow, but it does actually center. And that really sets this unit apart from most any other plug-and-play unit you'll find. It actually reminds me of a paddle controller from like the Atari 2600. Now, all these games are, some of these games are actually sequels to other games that were in the earlier unit. Ms. Pac-Man and Galaga are effectively sequels, and Xevious is another overhead shooter game like Bosconian. So let's take a look at some captured footage and see if this unit is actually worth picking up. Ms. Pac-Man as a game by itself was a real improvement over the original. And like with the arcade cabinets, the Ms. Pac-Man plug-and-play unit is a marked improvement over the original Pac-Man game. First off, the sound emulation is far superior to the Namco plug-and-play I reviewed on Monday. The gameplay is similar to the first one. Actually, it includes games that are similar to the earlier games. You got Xevious, which is a vertical spaceship shooter, a scrolling vertical spaceship shooter, I should say, and Galaga, which is a sequel to Galaxian, which was on the first unit I showed, and both of those are highly improved compared to earlier titles. Galaga is much better than Galaxian. It's much more detailed, and arguably much more famous. But let's go back to the original game itself, Ms. Pac-Man. Now, Ms. Pac-Man is actually a very interesting unit as the actual arcade game, not so much this thing. Despite the fact that the title screen on this game shows that Namco owns it, and they do, it was actually created by a company called the General Computer Corporation as an enhancement kit for the original Pac-Man. They later sold it to Midway, who owned the US licensing rights. Midway would actually go on to make several kits or several games, arcade games that were not created by Namco, because they at the time owned the rights to distribute Pac-Man games in the US. Eventually, that ticked off Namco, so they took the rights back, but that's something completely separate. Now, there were, I believe, 4 games that they made, and Ms. Pac-Man is by far the most well-received of the group. It's almost as famous as Pac-Man itself, the game itself. It's actually, since it was created by an American company and distributed by another American company, it's actually the highest selling American arcade unit ever, according to Wikipedia. And it's one of the best games. It's far superior, really, to its original counterpart, because it refines a lot of things that had made the original game so good. But you probably aren't really looking at this for a review of Ms. Pac-Man, because you've played Ms. Pac-Man. And one of the things I said about the original Namco Plug and Play is very much in effect here. Most, if not all, of these games, actually I do believe all of these games, are easily available on a lot of other things. So you can easily get them on a Namco museum or something like that for whichever home console you have, or PC or whatever. So really, the only real reason that you would want to get this game would be for the innovative twist mechanic, which I will discuss. Actually, I'll discuss that last, because I still have 3 more games to finish. Galaga. Let's move on to Galaga. Galaga is a really, it's a vertical spaceship shooter similar to Space Invaders or Galaxian, but it also refines a lot of those things. You have the added chargers, the captured ship mechanic, a lot of things that are just make it a better game than Galaxian or Space Invaders. The Space Invaders is really completely different. I mean, this version is roughly as good as the arcade version, which I played. With Mappy, I can't say I have played that because I don't even think I've ever seen a Mappy unit. It's apparently some sort of chasing type game where you go around and try and catch TVs and pieces of art. I'm not 100% certain. I'm not a big fan of it. There must be someone who is, at least, or someone at Namco, because there were definitely other games they could have added to this collection instead. But it's probably the low light of the entire collection. Xevious is a vertical actual scrolling shooter. It seems similar to a lot of the games you would have seen on like the NES. Something like Raiden, or can't think of any other ones at the moment. But it's extremely difficult, and it's one of the few games that uses the second button on the joystick, which is for shooting bombs at ground units or ground targets for extra points and self-preservation. I'm really terrible at these types of games too, especially the ones on like the NES. So let's move on to the last game I talked about, Pole Position. Now, Pole Position is a Formula 1 style racing game. And if you've ever played the arcade unit, it has a full-size steering wheel. And you can turn 360 degrees easily. Now, obviously, they couldn't add a full-size steering wheel to a plug-and-play unit. But instead, that's how they use that innovative twist mechanic to simulate something like a paddle controller. It's kind of too bad that instead of something like, instead of Mappy, that they didn't include something like, say, Breakout. Which I'm not sure what version of Pong or Breakout Namco made, but I'm pretty sure they made at least one, because everyone did. I know Arkanoid was made by Taito, but whatever, that's not important at the moment. But yeah, the twist control is actually pretty responsive, and given that it sticks a lot more, it's a lot harder to turn than any of the arcade units I played of Pole Position. Admittedly, all of those are 30 years old. I think it's almost better than that, because it gives you a little bit more finite control over the unit than the very spinny wheels do. But that's just a matter of personal preference. The sound on most of these games, at least the ones that I've played real arcade games of, is pretty good. Maybe even perfect. Unfortunately, all of these plug-and-play units are only in mono, so I copied the sound over from the right channel to the left channel, so otherwise you'd be hearing it in just one earphone, and it would sound terrible. So I'm cheating on the stereo. But the graphics are good. I mean, they're not upgraded or anything. I think they're about as good as you would get out of one of the arcade machines, but still, they're 30-year-old arcade machines. Compared to the Namco unit that I reviewed earlier on Monday, this one's definitely a much improved upgrade. And if you're really in the Pole Position, you really want that paddle controller type feel out of it, without having to do an Atari port or something, I would say this is probably a good option. Otherwise, again, these are all games that are in a Namco collection for your PlayStation or your Xbox or whatever. So it's good, but it's may not be worth it unless you find it for a really good price. Now, tomorrow on Thursday, we're going to be taking a look at a Dreamcast game that was not included in a collection, Ms Pac-Man Maze Madness. We'll see you then, and make sure to stay tuned in the Last Call games. I don't even know if the server... I didn't even check to see if the servers were still up. I'll just assume they weren't. So, if you're a big Pac-Man fan and you're watching Pac-Man Week, you probably are.